there is people out here that are literally hunting for these kids.
There is evil in this world. Hello, everyone. You are watching Fox 26 Crime Files. I'm your host, Abigail Dye. This week, I have a guest for you, Angelica Robles. She is a former undercover agent who worked right here in the Houston area in human trafficking, specifically child sex trafficking. And she's here today to talk about that subject. It's a hard one to talk about, but it's very important. She's also a Forbes published award-winning author with 18 years of experience in government and private investigations. So she has a rap sheet when it comes to this topic. Without further ado, here's that interview. Angelica, thank you so much for being here to speak with us about such a huge issue here in Houston. So you came to Houston, you said back in 2008 for human trafficking specifically. Tell me about that.
So I was transferred down here in 2008 to really work on human trafficking cases, interrogations, especially with the perpetrators and the victims. Mm-hmm. So I was specifically picked from Chicago to come to Houston because I speak Spanish to come here to deal with that.
Okay. And I know that different sources pull data from different places, and they do rank Houston among the top 5 cities for human trafficking. Many places saying that it is the worst city in the U.S. for human trafficking. Is that lining up with, your knowledge?
Yes. And the reason being is because we're close to the border. And because of that, not only do we have the human trafficking, we also have the cartels and the drug activity. So.
Right. And so kind of take me back to when you first started doing this undercover work here. What kind of things did you see in Houston? What was shocking to you? What have you gone through?
So the most shocking thing for me was how there's parlors here in Houston.
Parlors.
Sex parlors. And they are masked as massage places.
Right.
But they're not. They have the flashing lights. And so when they have the flashing lights, you already know that this is a massage parlor and not a massage therapy spot. A lot of the workers at these massage parlors are women, most of them who are under 18 years of age, that are pretty much doing the massages, but also with happy endings. And they are human trafficked. So they are not there willfully.
And that's something that's common here in Houston.
It's very common here, and it's very hard to shut them down because even when you go in, they check you to make sure there's no wires on you, there's no cameras on you. So a lot of people are keeping these places in business because they're going to get a service with a happy ending.
And flashing light, what do you mean by that?
So like it will say massage with a flashing light, like the neon sign will be flashing. That's how you know.
I see those all the time.
Yeah. And the crazy thing is, what I couldn't understand is how are these places still open?
Yeah.
But because there is large investigations going on for years and years and years to try to indict all these places, we need to have a lot of evidence in order to close them down.
And when you say these people in these parlors tend to be underage, like how young are we talking?
So the most trafficked age that the perpetrators are looking for is 11. And 11 years old. And the reason being is when you're about 13, you're already starting to grow. So you're starting to develop into a woman. Whereas an 11-year-old, you're still not a little kid, but you're still a little girl. So remember, a lot of the people that enjoy children it's a vice. It's an addiction to, pedophilia, pretty much. But it's almost difficult for us because you always need evidence. You know what I mean? You always need evidence. Evidence is always needed.
Right.
So when you go to these parlors, they will check you. They'll check you to see if you have no wires. They'll check you to see if you have no cameras. And a lot of times they can say, hey, we don't want to serve you if they feel a certain type of way.
Okay.
But they're everywhere.
So it's hard for you to come out of these places with evidence.
Right.
And so I think that's a big question that people have. If we know that these are sex trafficking rings, if we know that children are being trafficked through them, why can't we just shut them down? And that's the answer.
So the other thing is that a lot of people don't realize, and it's not public knowledge, is a lot of these places are paying month by month rent. So they'll come and go. And so a lot of these places will operate for a certain amount of time, and then next thing you know, they'll be gone and they will change location. Just like a lot of the cantinas where they have the children. I've spoke about this in a different interview, and people could not believe it. There is places and spots that you can go, and there's kids lined up against the walls, and you can take your pick. And then they'll bring the kids in, and then the kids will be gone. And even in the same cantinas, some weekends will happen, some weekends they won't. And so a lot of people get upset and say, why aren't we closing these places down? And what the public doesn't understand is that we need years and years and years of evidence to be able to convict and to be able to save as many children as we can. So if we know that there's activity going on, we can't just go and shut down, because there will be a possibility that we're leaving a lot of kids behind.
Right. It's like you could save those kids in that instance, but so many more behind closed doors.
Right.
That is terrible. And I actually had that written down. So cantina bar brothels is what Elijah Rising was calling them. So you're saying that these are places that people go.
Yeah.
And they have several children to choose from.
Yeah. They'll line them up. Just imagine like a brothel with, grown women. Line them up against the wall, and they say, hey, which one do you want? And they'll take them, rape them, and they'll go back to the wall. It's disheartening, but it's also insane that this is going on in our city and really all over the world. And another thing that I want to stress is it's not just in bad neighborhoods. It happens everywhere. It could be in somebody's mansion. Somebody can order, kids or young girls to be brought to their house, the parties and all that.
And generally speaking, I know you said earlier Houston is such a hub for this because we're so close to the border. Are these kids who were trafficked from Mexico?
Some are, but most are actually kids. They're American citizens. They're kids from here. And I think one of the big misconceptions about human trafficking is that they think that a lot of the kids are illegal immigrants that come, or like we like to say, unaccompanied children that cross the border. They are at higher risk of going into human trafficking because they don't have anybody looking after them.
Right.
But the biggest thing is teenagers, kids in foster care. So kids who are already displaced and are showing signs of abandonment. And of course, you always hear about kids that get snatched up at Katie Mills. So there's people that are out there looking for kids with a certain aesthetic because the clients prefer a certain aesthetic. So we're talking like blonde hair, blue eyes. We can talk about kids that look ambiguous, culturally ambiguous. So curly hair, lighter skin,
right?
That type of thing.
And again, when we're talking about these brothels, these cantinas, we're talking about kids who are 11.
Yeah, I mean, some of them could be as young as 4.
4 years old?
Yeah, because here's the thing that I always tell people. If there's a need for something, a product, in this case, it's a person, people will pay for it. And so we get into the actual purchase of humans. You can sell a child more than once. Whereas drugs, you can only sell it once. And if the child is quote unquote a virgin, then they charge more for it. But most of these kids are not virgins because they've already been raped. And so there is doctors that they pay to have the girls have their hymens really reversed or pretty much retied back, sewed back together so that they can say, oh, this one's a virgin, so this one costs more. This one's going to cost you more.
That is so hard to wrap your head around. So not only do we have, human trafficking, child sex trafficking, but then we have these doctors or, surgeons who are getting operated on children to make them available for sex trafficking.
Right. Money talks. And one of the other things is 40% of the human trafficking that's happening in Houston is children. It's all children.
40%.
40%. The 60% is immigrants or other people that come from different countries, not necessarily Mexico or Central America. It can also be Asia or Vietnam, other countries that have immigrants coming into the U.S. And they pay them very low wages to do construction work, to work at restaurants. So that's also considered human trafficking.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, I know Elijah Rising had some numbers. They said that about 313,000 victims of human trafficking are here in Texas. 79,000 of those are minors.
Are children, yeah.
Do those numbers add up to you?
Yeah, they add up correctly, yeah. I think so. The actual industry of human trafficking is $160 billion worldwide. Here in Texas, the last number that I had seen was 6.6 million. That's
Wow.
how much of people are being sold for profit. So when I came to Houston, I was actually interrogating the victims I was interviewing the victims and interrogating the perpetrators. So that was where I came in, and I was trying to figure out why. Why did you do this? Who's involved? And so you
Right.
try to piece a story together. And it's
Oh my
very
gosh.
difficult because when I started, I didn't have children. So it was difficult then. But after I had my daughter, it became even more difficult. So I always tell this to people. I almost never bring my kids to the grocery store. And if I do, I put them inside the cart because it's harder to get a child outside of the cart than if it's walking next to you.
Wow. So your experience
Yeah.
in this field literally has stopped you from bringing your kids to the grocery
Yeah.
store.
I don't bring my kids to the grocery store.
That's terrifying.
I don't take them to the mall by myself. If I go, I bring a friend.
And I mean, how often
Yeah.
are kids taken from grocery stores,
All the time.
malls, and then put?
All the time. A lot of them don't even make public. They don't make the media. A lot of, and this is what I tell my friends with teenagers. All the kids want to go watch a movie. They want to go out to dinner with their friends. They need to be in communication with their parents and have an AirTag on them or have their location on their phone, because there is people out there snatching children that are wanted or, like I said, aesthetically pleasing for the customer.
Throughout your experience interviewing these perpetrators and the children, I'm kind of interested in you interviewing these kids. What kind of conversations would you have?
A lot of the times I ask them how it happened. Now, a lot of the undocumented children were pretty much sold into the human trafficking circles. The ones that are U.S. citizens were either from coming out of foster care or they had ran away from home. I think the quote was 1 in 4 children that are runaways ended up in human trafficking or solicited for sex.
Oh my goodness.
1 in 4. And it's not just little girls. It was also little boys.
And what happens to these kids as they get older? I'm sure there's an age that they kind of age out of,
Yes,
being wanted by these
for sure.
pedophiles.
Yeah, I would say that that age is around 16 to 18 because you start growing into your adolescent and into adulthood. But a lot of the times by this time, the kids have been so misguided and their mental health is completely destroyed that most of them will end up either joining, the strip clubs, or they'll end up being, escorts. They'll
Right.
remain in that life because that's all they know.
Yeah.
And these kids are stripped of their identities. They're stripped of who they are, and they literally become part of this family, which just becomes human trafficking. And I almost feel like when I was interviewing these kids, they're dead inside.
Yeah.
That's how I felt. Like they literally were dead inside, and they were forced to grow up because you're dealing with adults raping children. And so they were forced to grow up.
There is evil in this world. That is terrible. How young was the youngest person you interviewed?
So I interviewed a 4-year-old, and a 4-year-old can barely speak, right? And is learning to really process. But what I've noticed is even if you interviewed an 8-year-old, their mindset is of a 4-year-old. So if
Right.
you're interviewing a 4-year-old that's been to extreme trauma, they really don't have much to share other than yes, no, yes, no. And you would
Right.
ask them, did he do this? Did he? And you literally have to talk to them in a way that, did they stick anything inside of you? Did you feel anything? Did you bleed? Did they hit you? Like stuff like that.
Like
And
very specific
questions. And you always had to ask things like, was it a body part? Was it stuck to them, or was it an object that was not stuck to them? And most of the time it would be both. There's very sick people in this world. And what a lot of people don't realize, that it's not just the perpetrators are CEOs, they're pastors, they're fathers, even the women, they're teachers, they're, CEOs. They actually have high positions.
These are people walking
Yeah.
around among us.
Yeah, they're high earning people. And that's why they always say when a crime happens, you never know what was going on behind that person's mind that got them to that point to do that. I would encourage everybody to understand the signs of human trafficking, educate yourself in the numbers here in Houston, and how you can be of service to our own community.